Okay, thanks to everybody for joining today. This is Knowledge Drop, focusing on Cornami, where we're going to talk about what's happening with FHE and quantum security. I think I've met most of you. If I haven't, my name is Jack Crawford. I'm founding managing partner at CIVC. Just wanted to mention briefly that our firm leverages corporate intelligence. Effectively, if you look at the left-hand side of this chart, we do outreach to corporate M&A teams and corporate venture groups, along with corporate customers to understand where the interest is, where they're going to be buying products, where they're going to be investing in companies, and candidly, where they're going to be acquiring companies. And we try and use this information to elevate our investing IQ as we make investments, develop investment themes, and then secure follow-on investments. We've had about $500 million worth of follow-on investment from corporates into our portfolio companies, along with other investors, and we've been able to secure corporate customers as well for our portfolio companies. So that's a big part of our model in investing at the seed and early stage level. You want to do two things: mitigate the risk of those early stage investments by using corporate intelligence, and then ideally shorten the timeline to exit. So anyway, that's a quick overview on our firm. We host Knowledge Drop as a way of giving visibility to people in our network to interesting technology trends and investing trends. And so some interesting things have happened this summer, actually. The U.S. government has put out some mandates, including basically securing the the nation against advanced cryptographic attacks. So on June 22nd of this year, just 30 days ago, EO 14413 on quantum innovation and EO 012 basically talked about how there's going to be a hard deadline of December 31st of 2030 for government contractors to upgrade to quantum resistant encryption. And so what we've done for today's session is we brought in two experts on what's happening with quantum and areas like FHE that we think are particularly relevant, to provide you an overview not only on sort of the progress of one of our portfolio companies, but to help you learn a little bit about what's going on with some of these industry trends. So a big part of what we've learned from these corporates is their enthusiasm for AI infrastructure and quantum computing. And now there's this government tailwind that has come along that should help to transform innovation into customer demand and a real market opportunity. I'm excited because two people who I've gotten to know well over the last 5 years were available for today's call, along with all of you. Jan Geldmacher is the CEO of Cornami, and he was former president at Sprint Business, all the way up through the $23 billion merger with T-Mobile. He was an operating partner at SoftBank, and so I'm happy to have Jan here. And then Craig Gentry is the CIO at Cornami. He's a Stanford PhD in computer science. Most of you know him as the father of fully homomorphic encryption. And if you're looking for hats like this, they're for sale in most airports across the country now because FHE is such a big deal. That is what we're gonna cover over the next hour or so. Maybe a bit less with my questions and maybe some of your questions. If you have questions along the way, feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll see if we can actually take them toward the end of the session. But it's going to be a bit of a rapid fire session about what's going on in this space and with Cornami. And without further ado, just let me welcome Jan and Craig. Hi guys, how's it going today?
Thanks for having us, Jack.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So you guys are the technical geniuses. I'm sort of, still coming up to speed on all this stuff and trying to figure out how these innovations are relevant to market demand and technology commercialization. So I want to just open with some high level comments, and then I want to dive into kind of the market and the competitive landscape, a little bit about the technology, if you can break it down so that, sort of a high school student could understand some of the deep technology things that you're working on, and I want to end with technology commercialization. How does that sound for today?
Very good.
Okay, awesome. So as I understand it, no quantum computer can break encryption today. So why do we care about this now?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jack. And by the way, nobody has ever called me a technical genius. So you're the first. So hope I can live up to that expectation that raises. Anyway, so why have we to look at this today? It's very simple because the stealing already starts. So companies are trying to protect their data, but the stealing starts. So there is bad actors that steal data, although they cannot decrypt it yet. Quantum computers are on the rise, and it will take a couple of years from now to actually have them at a stage where they can decrypt the code that is used today. And some people say it's 28, some people say it's 30, some people say it's 2033, but it will happen ultimately. And if the stealing starts today already, the data is shelved with the bad actors and will be decrypted later. So it's very critical to make sure that you protect your data, even if you think it cannot be decoded or decrypted today. If it has a shelf life that goes beyond that Q date when quantum computers can hack the code.
Yeah. Okay. And Craig, you have been called a technical genius a few times in your in your lifetime, I'm sure. Can you, for some of us are obviously familiar with FHE. I think you invented it in 2009. It was viewed as kind of the holy grail of cryptography. Can you just sort of, at the 40,000 foot level, what is FHE for people who are just hearing fully homomorphic encryption for the first time?
Well, basically, it allows you to encrypt on data or compute on data while it's encrypted. So if you imagine that you send all of your files encrypted and store them on the cloud, and then later you want to pull down the files that have some keyword in them, um, the normal, without homomorphic encryption, the cloud would have to decrypt all those files. So it would have to have the secret key. It would see all those files, and then at that point, it could send you the files that have the keyword in them. So FHE allows you to do all that without the decryption key. So the cloud can send you whatever you want. It can do processing on your encrypted data, never see your data, and it'll still send you back exactly what you want. Do the processing on the data that you want.
So we're going to talk later about how important this is in the financial services industry and in the healthcare industry. Oftentimes, when I've described it, and you can help correct me, Craig, sort of this ability to process encrypted data without decrypting it becomes pretty important if we all have private healthcare information, but we're trying to aggregate the knowledge from each of us as individual humans on the planet. Things end up becoming, pretty important to be able to aggregate the patterns. How are people getting sick? How are people getting healthy? How are people living longer? All those things become pretty important. What would you correct or edit with regard to how I just described that in a simple case?
No, that's pretty good. If you want to solve cancer, then basically each individual hospital is a silo. It can work with the data on its patients. But if you want to have a larger scale study that goes across multiple hospitals, um, you can't really do that, except with something like homomorphic encryption, which allows them to pool their data and pool their computation, and nobody sees anything except the final result. They do all the analysis on the encrypted data.
Jan, when did you first sort of realize that FHE and some of the inventions by Craig and at Cornami were actually commercially viable, businesses? I mean, you've established yourself as a global technology commercialization expert, right, with your previous endeavors. When did you start thinking that this isn't just math or a science project? This is actually a commercially viable solution for the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think, I've talked to many customers. There's a lot of customers, large corporations out there, for example, from the financial sector or the insurance sector, that have looked at fully homomorphic encryption and, kind of thought this is a very interesting technology that can be applied in a commercial application. However, they also thought that the computing power that is necessary to run them was not available. And now I think there's a couple of barriers that have fallen. And one barrier is that Craig and his work and his team actually have removed a lot of the original overhead that was, the basis of fully homomorphic encryption. Therefore, it's much lighter when it comes to the application that needs to be run on computers. So this is the one barrier that kind of was removed. The second barrier was the computing power. I mean, we have developed a computer chip and built up a server that can accelerate in a way that fully homomorphic encryption can be applied in a commercial viable way. And actually, the third barrier that I believe gives us a lot of tailwind is the regulatory environment. With the executive order that you have just quoted, Jack, I think that gives us a good push because by 2030 now, all government agencies and contractors have to implement a quantum safe encryption methodology, and fully homomorphic encryption is such a methodology to encrypt data quantum safe. And then on top of that, there's NIST, that's the regulator in that environment, that also comes up with a lot of kind of standards that they have defined based on for encryption. And again, fully homomorphic encryption is a part of that defined sets of encryption methodologies that can be applied. So there's a lot of things coming together right now, and that makes it a very commercially viable approach for us today.
So Jan, let's talk a little bit about the market landscape, because Cornami is not the only company out there in the space. Well, in fact, 4 or 5 years ago was shoulder to shoulder with companies like Grok and Cerebras. And this last 6-7 months have been incredible, right? You have Grok NVIDIA transaction at 20 billion. You have Cerebras, I think I checked earlier today, it was like at $48 billion. Its IPO just happened 5 weeks ago. So there's some, in addition to NVIDIA, there's some other sort of players that have, basically raced into incredible, market valuations. I think Cerebras CEO is quoted as saying he has $25 billion of backlog. I mean, there's just a growing amount of demand. How does Cornami fit? Where's the open swim lane for Cornami in what appears to be a very exciting market landscape?
Yeah, first of all, I think this market is extremely interesting and exciting because it's huge and it's growing very fast. So people say that the AI acceleration market has a size of about 600 plus billion US dollars by 2030. So this is an enormous market to go after. And we are playing some role in that market segment of AI acceleration with our hardware and our algorithms that we bring to the play here. But then also there's, of course, on top of that, a lot happening in the quantum computing environment. So you also quoted the Executive Order 13, 14413, which kind of enforces the development of quantum computers in order to win the race, the US to win the race for quantum computers between Asia, China mainly, but also the European Union. So that's adding to the market as well. And with quantum computers on the rise, I think we have found our niche to compete at with our specialized hardware that can accelerate those applications that we're talking about here, quantum resistant encryption. And we are playing a role in this market. And this is a very exciting market for us as well. So we all know that quantum computers will crack the code, traditional RSA encryption at one point in time, and companies need to prepare to defend against that today in order to be ready when that happens. So that's the market segment we are going after. It's a very specialized segment, but huge when it comes to growth opportunity.
So billions and billions of dollars going into this quantum computing area worldwide, a growing number of exits. Getting back to the technology, Craig, there's this theme out there that I've heard a number of times, sort of harvest now, decrypt later. Can you help me understand, help the audience understand, sort of what does that actually mean?
Well, it means that if you encrypt something with RSA or elliptic curve cryptography now, and some malicious person obtains that ciphertext, they can't decrypt it now, but when a quantum computer actually exists, this could be, quantum computer owned by a nation state or by your, commercial rival or whatever, they can decrypt it when they have that quantum computer. So if you want to keep your information private for 10 years, you should start worrying now, or maybe you should have started worrying 5 years ago, because basically the US wants a quantum computer like within the next few years, if possible. There's a big push for that. Whether it's actually going to happen or not, I'm not a quantum expert. I believe that, it's just a matter of engineering. The theory is solid. Quantum mechanics says that you can, in principle, build a computer that does these computations. It's just a matter of engineering. So if the government puts billions of dollars into this effort, it's probably going to happen pretty soon. So you should start worrying now. You should start moving over your encrypted data to what are called post-quantum crypto systems. And those are just regular crypto systems. They don't use a quantum computer. You can, use them with your laptop, but they're believed to be secure against malicious parties that have a quantum computer. So they're not breakable by a quantum computer, as far as we know. That could change, but people have tried hard for a couple of decades, and it hasn't happened.
Security in general seems to be growing. The importance of security and data security in particular seems to be growing by the week. We're hearing stories about using certain AI tools and certainly things happening at the national lab level and corporate level. Is sort of Q Day, is your view that Q Day, describe your view of Q Day and sort of how, is it getting closer? Is that what you're saying? 2 or 3 years from now, basically the U.S. government will have created something. I want you, for the people who are less technical and are attending today's session, and understand generally sort of computer security and what's happening. Can you just talk a little bit about quantum computing as it relates to Q Day and what the U.S. government, what your timing is, what your timing sort of estimate is, where this really becomes a major issue?
But yeah, Q-Day is basically when a big enough quantum computer exists that it can break crypto, for example. It's been a joke in the community for a long time that it's always 20 years away. And it's been that way for at least 20 years, and it hasn't happened yet. So, but things are kind of changing because big companies like Google and IBM are focusing on it. The government's focusing on it. So I think the consensus is that things are changing and it will happen um, probably within the next 10 years. I do think the market is overhyping it. So when you look at the actual applications of quantum computing, a big one is breaking cryptography, but I don't know if there's a big commercial market for that. Certainly the governments are interested in that. And there are certain quantum simulations that you can do. So if you want to, like in building chips, there are quantum effects that you want to consider and simulate, and quantum computers are good at simulating quantum effects. So that's another application. The market is really, I think, out of control in terms of quantum computers, especially when you compare it to us, which is like, real tangible hardware acceleration that exists now for real tangible applications like fully homomorphic encryption. But it is coming, and it is something that you need to worry about.
Yeah, and I mean, if I may add here, so I think what people say is, 2,000 plus qubits will be enough to hack the code that is out there today, and that will happen sooner rather than later, I guess. And although money doesn't solve the technical issues or the physics that are needed to be overcome in order to create that powerful computer, money will definitely accelerate the time it takes to build that computer. Because when the U.S. government decides to put 50 billion US dollars into quantum computing, something will happen. And then if you look at on the other side of the occasion here, sorry, my phone was ringing. On the other side of the occasion here, then you see that the migration to new quantum safe protection will take at least 5 years from now. You have to start today in order to be ready when the quantum computers are ready to crack the code. And that's why it's an urgent problem to solve. It's not something that you can put on the bench.
Yeah. So, what does the government mandate actually require now? Why are they pushing this now? Why now has this suddenly become a significant priority? And what are they actually requiring?
Yeah. So this Executive Order 14412 requires all government contractors plus all government agencies to migrate to a quantum safe encryption methodology. And that is so important because they also put a timestamp on it. They said that has to happen until the end of 2030. So that's not long out. And if you know that the migration from one encryption methodology to the next normally takes 5 to 10 years, it's better to start now to comply with this executive order. Now, this executive order is for organizations that are the government or work with the government, but it has, of course, a follow-up effect down the value chain because if you work in critical infrastructure, you work with government. If you work in telecommunications, you work with government. If you work in financial services, you work with the government. So basically, this executive order means that all related companies that will ultimately end up working for the government in the value creation, need to comply with that executive order. That's why it's so important, and that's why it's so critical to look at this right now.
So I guess the general view is that in addition to government as a customer, your view is that there's going to be adjacent industries that are dragged along as customers because of their requirement to comply.
Yeah, if you're running a big financial institution or a big insurance company or a big healthcare company, you of course look at what the executive's orders are describing or requiring, and then you comply. And the experience shows that in the past, executive orders or laws that have been issued for government organizations have been adopted by private organizations. Think about all the cloud regulation that we have in the US that was basically adapted after it was issued by the government, but it was adapted to private companies. And every regulated company out there anyway will have a very close look of what's going on in that space.
Craig, are these customers going to be looking for, help me understand post-quantum computing versus FHE? What's the difference? What are these customers going to be looking for? What do they need to address the government mandate and maybe other things that they should be concerned about?
Yeah, so again, post-quantum computing are crypto systems that so far we believe are not broken by quantum computers. And they're mostly what are called lattice-based crypto systems. NIST has already standardized some of these. Um, and they're for things like encryption, basic encryption and signatures. So I would say basic cryptographic functionalities. FHE is also lattice-based. It's also post-quantum secure, which is kind of lucky in a sense that you know um, these FHE schemes that have been built just to be able to compute on encrypted data are also post-quantum secure. So that's kind of fortuitous. It's built on the same mathematical principles. Um, and I would say, post-quantum encryption, it's good for like you talk about encryption for data at rest, data in transit and data in use. So the post-quantum crypto is mainly focused on at rest and in transit. But at some point, you also care about what happens to data while you're using it, and you don't. And it's kind of fortuitous that these crypto systems, FHE, also protects that third prong.
Why is data at rest and data in transit the weak spot? Why is that the weak spot?
Well, that's not a weak spot. That's just what basic cryptography protects. So if you have a post-quantum encryption scheme, and you encrypt it with that scheme and you store it, you've done your duty in terms of protecting it at rest. And you can also use them to send ciphertext in transit. So that would be secure against post-quantum computers. But data in use, like actual processing the data, that's something you can't do with just a basic encryption scheme. If it's encrypted, it looks kind of like a random blob if it's just a normal encryption scheme. And you can't really do anything with it except decrypt it. And so if you're storing your encrypted data on the cloud, well, the cloud just has to decrypt it to be able to use it. And so it needs your decryption key, which is not, if the cloud is breached, well, that data is lost.
Mhm.
So FHE prevents that kind of attack. The key can reside with you, but you can allow other people to do the processing on your data while it's encrypted.
So, Jan, based on Craig's comments, you've interacted with a lot of Fortune 500 executives throughout your professional career. there's these, chief information security officers out there that are trying to figure out, sort of exactly what is their best action over the next, 12 months. What's your view? What's your recommendation? What's your pitch to them on sort of what they should be doing and sort of the value of Cornami at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think CISOs are well aware what the threat is, obviously, right? So they need to start, if they haven't yet, start to build an inventory of the data that they need to protect and decide what's the data that is actually in jeopardy. I mean, if you think about it, a credit card probably has an expiration date of 3 years. So if credit card data is stolen today, it is a bad thing, and companies will have to pay a fine for that. However, it is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about data that has a shelf life that is beyond 10 years. And think about healthcare data, think about trade secrets, think about intellectual property, think about genome data. This has a lifelong lifetime. It will never expire. Or think about yourself and say, okay, what would you be embarrassed about if data is publicized in 5 years from now or in 10 years from now? And that's basically the guidance that you have in order to cluster your data and what needs to be protected today and what needs to be protected quantum safe going forward. That's one step. The second step probably is to have a proper migration plan. Most CISOs are shocked when they look at how long it takes to implement a new encryption methodology. And we're talking about a time frame of 5 to 10 years here, depending on the complexity and depending on the data that needs to be protected. And that is, you better start that today, that plan, in order to implement in time so that you are prepared when quantum computers are ready to crack the code. And as we said earlier, harvest today and decrypt tomorrow, doesn't leave us any time to spare here. We need to act now. And, looking at companies that can help you with that, like Cornami, with our know-how in the FHE environment, I think would probably be the right thing to do. And, prepare, basically. Prepare and start is probably the message I would give to CISOs today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I want to ask last two questions on the technology, and then I want to shift to kind of what the market landscape looks like, and I want to talk about technology commercialization and revenues, right? But last two questions, one for you, Craig, and one for you, Jan. Craig, maybe some have seen the analogy that you put together with regard to the locked glove box. I think it'd be interesting to have you just sort of quickly walk us through that, and then you were working on FHE quite some time ago. Maybe any thoughts on sort of what's kept it out of the real world and why, has your efforts with the team at Cornami sort of unlocked this new potential. So maybe a quick analogy, and then sort of why is now the right timing?
Yeah. So a long time. I mean, FHE is pretty hard to explain. So I came up with this physical analogy to explain it, which is called Alice's Jewelry Store. So basically, Alice has a jewelry store, and she has workers that basically take raw materials like gold and diamonds and silver, and they process those into finished pieces like rings and necklaces. But she's a little paranoid, so she doesn't really trust her workers, right? She doesn't trust them to sort of abscond with the raw materials. So she wants a secure method to allow her workers to process those raw materials into finished pieces, a method that she controls, right? And so this is I haven't patented this or anything, so you can, people in the Diamond District can use this. So basically the idea is, she creates a locked box. Only she has the key. And this box also has some gloves that the workers can insert their hands into. Okay. And what she does is she sticks the raw materials and, some tools and stuff into the box, and she locks it. And then she gives the box to the workers, and the workers stick their hands in the gloves, and they can, use the tools and basically create the finished piece inside the box. Okay, but this is an impenetrable box, so the workers can't get any of the raw materials or the finished piece. So They say, well, I have to give it back to Alice, and Alice decrypts it, unlocks it, right? And so this physical analogy is designed to give you kind of some intuition, some believability that this can actually exist in principle. So fully homomorphic encryption is the mathematical instantiation of that locked glove box. Anybody can encrypt data that's inside the encryption box, and then anybody else can kind of manipulate that encrypted data. They can't see it, but they can manipulate it according to a particular function that they want to compute on the data inside. But only Alice has the decryption key, so that ciphertext will be sent back, and she'll decrypt the final result, which is kind of the function applied to the encrypted data inside. So that's just designed to kind of help you believe it's impossible. It's possible. So as to why now, so basically, it's been, I guess, 16, 17 years since my thesis when I came up with this. My first scheme was very inefficient. I won't even tell you how inefficient it was, but it was basically impossible to implement the full thing and have it run in any reasonable amount of time. Since then, I would say that we've improved the overhead. By overhead, I mean the time it takes to compute on encrypted data versus the time it takes to compute on unencrypted data. We've improved that overhead by, I would say, at least a factor of 1 billion. That doesn't mean that it's as fast as computing on unencrypted data at this point. It's still more expensive, but the why now is that it actually now at this point it makes complete financial sense, especially for some financial applications for high frequency trading, that sort of thing. These financial applications where there's a lot of money to be made on cuts from the transactions, and that money more than pays for the amount of compute that you need to do to run the encrypted application, the encrypted financial application. So I won't go into too much detail about what sort of applications we're thinking about. But basically, we've closed the loop on it now makes financial sense. Yes, FHE has, still has reasonably high computational overhead, but it's more than paid for by many times over by the revenue you can bring in from an encrypted financial application that protects against things, typical attacks that you see, for example, on blockchains, which are not private.
Jan, just building on Craig's comments about timing, what does Cornami's chip change about things, and why can't this just be done on GPUs? Why isn't this sort of just resolved with existing technology at other large significant companies?
Yeah, the question is, I think there are two things coming together. One is the efficiency that Craig has created through taking away the overhead to a certain degree, and the second thing is, us bringing up the right computer chip that is a specialized design to support those sorts of applications. And the Konami chip is a chip that is designed in a principle that is called a post-von Neumann architecture. And post-von Neumann architecture basically means a share nothing architecture. And if you look at GPUs, when GPUs connect kernels with each other, they always, go from a kernel A to the memory and back to kernel B. And that takes time. And so a memory in this case is shared. In our case, every kernel has their own memory. Every chip has their own memory, and therefore the transaction happens within the chip without having the I/O link into the memory. That speeds up the process dramatically and helps us to parallelize without, without a penalty. So this post-von Neumann architecture is the basis for our chip that we have launched and taped out, and now is brought into servers, and the servers are built up and are now running stable, and are our product that we bring to market in combination with fully homomorphic encrypted algorithms, as Craig designed. So GPUs are Probably, not our competitor. It's more a coexistence or maybe a partnership between GPUs and the Konami hardware that is required in this case. I wouldn't say GPUs can't do the job. I would say Konami, in a combination with the GPU, can do the job better, more efficient, and more effective, and speed up the process so it becomes commercially viable.
So, Jan, there's a lot of discussion about like creating the next NVIDIA and going to compete with NVIDIA. It seems like a pretty uphill climb for a lot of companies. Can you walk through sort of the difference between AI compute at NVIDIA and sort of a purpose-built FHE accelerator? Maybe you and Craig could comment on that, because my understanding is it's not, hey, we're going to go take down NVIDIA. That seems like an impossible task. My understanding is that you believe you found a pathway to technology commercialization, and I don't know, there's like 50 or 60 issued patents at Cornami, a whole sort of open area where you can compete in some niches. Am I just right? How would you describe it?
Yeah, first of all, we don't see NVIDIA as a competitor. NVIDIA is doing an amazing job, and the GPUs that they are producing are doing an amazing job. But you just recently saw a corporation that they have published, which is the corporation with Grok, and it shows immediately that a GPU is not the right computing environment for everything that is out there, and you require probably going forward more specialized computing capabilities than the market is proposing or is introducing today. We see a clear trend to AI writing the code. If you talk to Google executives, they say 75% of new code that is written by AI. This speeds up the process of writing new applications very, very much. And hardware has always a problem to follow the speed of software. And therefore, the combination of traditional GPUs that are ever improving, of course, but with a hardware that is specialized to solve some, very hard computational problems makes a lot of sense. And that's how we position ourselves. So we have identified, FHE as the market to go after, but there's certainly also other markets. Our chip has a very high morphing speed. It morphs in less than 1 millisecond. That means it can change its configuration and its programming in less than 1 millisecond. And that basically plays into that game of adapting to newly developed software going forward. So, we think that the market is so huge that it has room for companies like us coexisting with NVIDIA, and maybe there's others, like AMD has just announced the GPU, a rackable GPU, so they're competing in that market. We don't intend to compete against the GPU. We have a specialized approach. You could probably rather compare our chip to an FPGA chip than to a GPU.
And what about all these Series A companies, Series B companies that have recently secured funding, Jan? I mean, it's many of them look like funded science projects, are kind of early, no silicon, not much software. It's sort of a team and an idea. What's your view on the lead time advantage that you might have? Because I think there's 10 or 12 of them just in the last in the last year that have raised $250 million or more. And sometimes at billion-dollar valuations, sometimes at $2 billion valuations. What's your view on sort of that part of the competitive landscape and any lead time advantage?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on. Obviously, I mean the market of the size, like the AI acceleration market that we talk about here, is ever growing. So it's huge, and of course that attracts lots of investors and attracts lots of inventors and people that want to design competing hardware. Now we see lots of companies that are having open data rooms right now that are in a Series A or Series B, and they basically present PowerPoint slides and get a valuation of 300 to 500 million, which is, I mean, honestly, it's crazy. It took us 166 million fully, funding over the years to tape out our first chip, and it took us a couple of years to do that. And we taped out our chip, first time right, without having to retape it or respin it. That's a pretty good success that others have to show first in order to justify such a high valuation, is my personal opinion. And I've talked to many investors over the last couple of weeks and months, that share that view. So maybe sometimes the market is a little bit overhyped when it comes to new ideas. Not unselfishly, I would point to companies that have already proven hardware and can prove that they can solve a problem and not only have a PowerPoint slide, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think so. Okay, so we've camped quite a bit on software, algorithms, hardware, sort of the overall market demand. Let's shift to customer traction, right? Let's shift to market demand, because there's some pretty incredible claims being made by the larger companies that are established, that are now public entities, talking about billions of dollars of backlog, right? And there's other obviously growing market demand. Can you give us a couple of specific use cases, Jan? I recognize, obviously, being on the board of the company, that you have confidentiality agreements that you sign with some companies that are becoming a customer because they want a 6 or 12 month lead time advantage. So I'm not asking that you go into detail on the elements of those economic agreements, but we do want to understand sort of the use cases that make sense and what you can disclose with regard to. So help us understand.
Happy to share some examples. So, I mean, first of all, we were talking about the threat of quantum computing so far, right? So, I mean, defending against that threat is a very important use case for us that we want to go after. However, we also have applications that are enabled, or use cases that are enabled through fully homomorphic encryption, that are not based on the threat of quantum computing, but that are based on other kind of reasons to implement fully homomorphic encryption. And I'm happy to share a few of them. So one is, we are working with a scientific organization that is doing physical experiments. And in that physical experiment, they have to capture data in very short period of time. They use our hardware to do that. So they capture data on our hardware, and then they encrypt it with fully homomorphic encryption, so that they can share the information based on encrypted data with other scientific organizations or commercial organizations without revealing their secret source. And now, these different organizations can work together on the same data pool and, kind of run their queries and their science based on encrypted data through fully homomorphic encryption. And then each company gets their results back and decrypts it, and has access to that in plain text. So that's a use case that we're implementing right now. Another use case is the typical challenge that many banks and stock exchanges have to work with, which is money laundering. They have to come up with anti-money laundering measures. Now, how do you do that? You basically have to compare your customer data and the transaction data of those customers of two or more banks, or two banks plus a stock exchange. So nobody wants to do that, and nobody's allowed to do that. You are not allowed to share customer data with each other, and you don't want to do that because that's your trade secret. Now, if you, however, fully homomorphic encrypt the data, everybody, kind of chimes in and put data into the database. You can run your queries against, money laundering patterns, and you identify those that are clearly showing those patterns, and then you only release the data of those that are actually suspicious of doing money laundering. So that's a way of fighting against something like money laundering. And then, Craig has indicated it a little bit. We see the market of high frequency trading as a huge opportunity. So high frequency trading, like on exchanges today where derivatives are traded, they work with blockchains. These blockchains trade within milliseconds. So I would say between 200 and 500, sometimes 800 or 900 milliseconds is what the blockchain trade happens. Now, when you are using a blockchain, you are making your trade transparent. Everybody can read it. Bots can read it. So when a bot reads the trade and you have somebody who wants to kind of disturb your trading result, they do something that's called front running. So they basically buy at a better price or sell at a worse price. And so they basically eat into your profit pool. That transparency of a blockchain leads to the fact that more than 50% of all trades are happening in dark pool, so not on that blockchain. Now, we found a way to encrypt those blockchains with fully homomorphic encryption so that all these, as Craig always says, shenanigans in the financial market can be avoided. And the trades stay completely unreadable by third parties. And the good thing is, or the exciting thing is, we can do that within the same latency that with our technology, it was in the same latency that other private exchanges do it with unencrypted data blockchain. So that's just a few examples for really exciting use cases, and that will drive us into revenue this year. We are very confident that we can create something here, and everybody has warned me not to talk about a hockey stick, and I will not do that. But that's of course what we aim for from this kind of application.
So as I understand it, high frequency trading is sort of the initial, in the bowling pin analogy, you found your initial niche market. You're going to focus on that, execute on that. But Craig, you've also put together some analysis on, I don't know, 15 or 17 other sort of areas where you think you have a technology lead time advantage. And so is the spirit of this, Jan, from a go-to-market strategy, go dominate this one niche and then start looking at kind of the next 2 pins to knock down, the next 3, and sort of take the company to market in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So the team has looked at different use cases, and we have great opportunity. It's basically unlimited what we can do with fully homomorphic encryption, our hardware acceleration. But we have decided to not broil the ocean, but focus on one, as you said, bowling pin, and then go after the next and the next and the next. But there's many applications out there. So we came up with a use case just for illustration where you see what's happening right now. Elon Musk with his SpaceX organization, Blue Origin, and many other companies are launching satellites at the thousands and 10,000s. And there's also defense organizations, there's nations that launch satellites. So you have I would call it a pollution of satellites in low orbit that are moving around. Who is actually coordinating them? So if you would fully homomorphic encrypt the data and the data of these satellites and do an anti-collision algorithms against encrypted data while satellites are moving, you solve that problem. Nobody wants to share satellite data with their competitor, but in that way, you could do it. So that's only one application. Or you could basically glean information from cars and encrypt the data so you don't reveal the pattern, the personal driving pattern of a driver. However, you can work with that data because it stays encrypted while you work with it, and create insurance policies to protect against accidents. So there's a ton of applications, and that's part of what I did over the last couple of years for Cornami as well, helping them to find those use cases. And they are out there, and we just have to grab them. We are ready to do that now.
So Jan, when you go to implement with these customers, it clearly represents an opportunity of going from tens of millions of revenue to hundreds of millions of revenue for Cornami. Is this a rip out what they had before and replace it? Or are you implementing a new layer of technology? What could disrupt the ability to collect on the significant revenues during the implementation process?
Yeah, I don't think it's a rip out. It's a careful migration to a new layer that people and companies have to do. And when we talk about protecting against the quantum threat, you were talking about a new layer of encryption for data in use, as Craig has explained earlier. There is encryption already in place for data on your computer. There's encryption already in place for data traveling from your computer to the data center or to the cloud. But there's no encryption today for data in use. And that's the new layer that we add. When it comes to those applications that I talked about earlier, these are entirely new applications that do not rip apart anything that is out there yet. So this is an incremental opportunity for companies to look at this.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a couple of last questions for you. I also want to, if there's an opportunity, I would love to cold call on Mark Edelstone, because I see he's on the call today, just on a market landscape question, because he knows it so well. So I'll give him the heads up that I might cold call him. And Pat, I'd ask you to unmute him if he's available to answer a question. But let me just ask, is the quantum threat all hype? What's your honest answer? And I think let maybe start with Craig and then Jan. I mean, a lot of buzz, a lot of discussion about the quantum threat and sort of a lot of hype out there. What's your sense? What's your honest answer about this whole quantum computing sort of area?
Well, yeah, it's hype relative to what? I mean, it's going to happen at some point. It's not going to happen tomorrow. I kind of doubt the valuations that quantum computing companies are getting are warranted. So it's something in the middle. It depends on where you're standing. So the reality is that it will happen, but over time, and I think the results will be less um, impressive than a lot of people think. But one thing that will have to happen is we've been talking about is that you will have to migrate to post-quantum crypto. No doubt about that, because that's really the biggest effect of quantum computing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Let me.
I would echo that. I would say, the honest view is we don't know when it happens, but we know it will happen. And therefore starting to protect against that is what we need to do. And I always try to compare it with an insurance policy. When you sign a policy for fire insurance, you don't know when the fire is happening, but you protect yourself anyway against it, and you hope it will never happen. But if it happens, you are protected. And it's a little bit the same today with quantum computing. We don't know if it happens in 2030. We don't know if it's happening in 2033. However, when data is stolen today already, looking at what potentially quantum computers can do, it's time to protect.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, are you there and available to answer a quick question? I'm going to cold
Sure.
call on you. Okay, great.
I'll try.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, if you don't know Mark Edelstone, he's global semiconductor investment banking at Morgan Stanley. He was involved in, I think, the last round of financing at Grok before they were acquired, and he was involved so that was a $20 billion transaction. He was also involved in helping with the Cerebras IPO, which was I think 6 or 8 weeks ago, and they're at $48 billion. So he knows the space. He's watching the landscape. He's been very helpful in providing ideas and advice and some connections for us. Mark, can you just talk about, I guess maybe a couple of minutes on just your view on what's happening in the market space? Why have things heated up so much here in 2026, and just your sort of general view on the potential opportunity for companies like Cornami?
Yeah, I would just highlight as well that I've been specializing in semiconductors since 1989, and I've had the unique opportunity of taking 32 companies public, all of which have been leadership companies. So the most recent one was Cerebras. Before that was Kioxia, who is a leader in non-volatile memory. Before that was Astera Labs, who is a leader in connectivity for AI servers. And the list goes on and on. It started with companies like Arm, Glen, Broadca, and many others. And so I've always looked for kind of very differentiated and disruptive. And the marketplace today is incredibly robust because of what's happening in AI. And I've seen now, when I started doing this in 1989, the whole semiconductor industry was $50 billion in size. And we're quickly moving to $1.5 trillion run rate today. And that is all really happening on the back of AI and the importance and capabilities that the semiconductor industry is delivering to that. And so you just look at what's happening with AI inference as an example. NVIDIA owned training, which was basically to take these large language models and get them trained so we then can use inference to access data and do something with it. That's where we've seen coding and all those, machine learning, all those things now that we all take for granted. And, just the last sort of year or so of things that are just very robust and capable. And that all requires tremendous amount of compute, tremendous amount of memory, tremendous amount of connectivity. Securing data is going to be a very important part of that as well. And so those are what the things that are really driving so much success here. You see it with the hyperscalers. Just to give you a sense, in 2020, as an example, if you took the hyperscalers, and we didn't really have neoclouds then, but just took the amount of CapEx for what was happening in cloud compute. It was $120 billion in 2020. This year, we're around $1 trillion, and the growth has been enormous. We just saw Google report yesterday, and they're increasing their CapEx even more than what was before. They're up to like 80% or so year-over-year growth. You can see the massive ramp at companies like Anthropic and OpenAI that went from literally zero revenues 2 years ago to now run rates for Anthropic over $50 billion annualized today. OpenAI is somewhere in the 30 billion plus range. So these are just incredible usage models and businesses that have exploded here in a very short period of time. And so off of all that CapEx, it's pretty clear that there's going to be a tremendous amount of just downstream revenue that goes to the real building blocks of that, which is coming from the broad semiconductor industry, from companies like NVIDIA, AMD, Astera Labs, Credo, Micron, SK Hynix, and so on and so forth. And Cornami, with what they do, is obviously very differentiated and in a position, I think, to capture value and create real meaningful opportunities. So that's a long answer, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good sense as to why there's so much interest. I would say as well, as maybe one last thing, which I find to be interesting, is if you just simply took the top 5 players in each of the major verticals, so here would be semiconductors, internet, software, and systems, took the 5 companies in those spaces, 5 basically most profitable companies in those spaces back in 2010, you would have found that semiconductors were the smallest and least valuable of that. And as it's transitioned to what we see now in 2026, semiconductor companies are now very large. They're not the largest, but they're still quite large relative to those other players, but they are far and away the most profitable, i.e. the highest free cash flow margins, and they have the highest multiples of those companies as well, because there's so much value being created by the semiconductor industry. One last comment, if you took the 10 most valuable technology companies in the S&P 500 today, you would find that effectively all of them are either semiconductor companies like NVIDIA, AMD, Micron, Broadcom, or they have meaningful semiconductor activity going on inside of them, like Apple, Amazon, Google, and so on. So that's what's created so much interest here, I think, in technology, and why we're seeing so much growth as AI and physical AI at the edge, all those things basically are driving tremendous demand and tremendous capabilities.
Thanks so much for that, Mark. I appreciate that. It's been fun getting to know you and your background over the last couple of years, and we learned a lot from you. And you made some incredible curated introductions to potential advisors and potential acquirers. And so it's just been, anyway, thanks for the thought partnership. I realize it's informal between Morgan Stanley and Cornami, but anyway, really appreciate you and your experience and the opportunity to learn. I know we've got to wrap up. Jan, I'm going to give you the last 60 seconds. You get, I guess, a free rein. You can give a commercial on Cornami. Where's it going to be in a few years? Where's Cornami headed? Tell us about the vision, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think what has always impressed me is Intel being the Intel Insight company for personal computers. Konami, I think we can achieve to be the standard for post-quantum encryption computing in the future. And I think it will take about 5 years to get there, but I think Konami is prepared to go there.
Well, thanks to both of you, and thanks to everybody else that made time during busy days away from family and work and everything else to join us today. Look forward to keeping in touch with all of you. Feel free to follow up with Jan directly on any questions as it relates to Cornami. Always feel free to call me or email me. Really look forward to connecting with all of you and staying in touch. But thanks again for making time today. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.